They looked me up and down in their marble foyer and said I wasn't good enough to sit at their table. I stood there, grease still under my nails, the scent of highway dust clinging to my shirt. Every eye in that house was polished glass, cold, hard, unblinking. Margaret Harrington's lips curled like she'd just tasted something rotten. "If you can't dress like a human being," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut, "then don't sit with human beings." The guests laughed. Politely, of course. The kind of laugh that says, "We're better than you." Nathan, my son-in-law, didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. Only Emily, my daughter, looked like she wanted to disappear. I should have left right then. But here's the thing about moments like this. When people humiliate you in public, they think the scene will end with you walking away. Small, broken. They don't expect the door to open. They don't expect justice to walk in. And they sure as hell don't expect it to be wearing heels and a navy blazer. That night, the balance shifted. The people who thought they held all the power found out they'd built their kingdom on sand. If you've ever seen arrogance crumble in front of real character, if you've ever wished someone would stand up and cut the arrogant down to size, stay with me. You're about to hear how it happened. And if you believe in justice, in dignity over status, hit subscribe so you never miss the next moment someone gets exactly what they deserve. Jack Miller, 58 years old. A sun-worn face of a man who spent his life working with his hands. Calloused palms. A thin scar across his thumb, a souvenir from when an engine block slipped 20 years ago. He lives alone in Columbus, Ohio. A modest two-bedroom apartment, beige walls, old but spotless furniture. On the kitchen table sits a single-framed photo of his wife, Mary, smiling in her wedding dress. Mary died of cancer 3 years ago. Since then, the silence in his home has matched the silence in his heart. People in town call him the old mechanic, but customers know him as a man whose word is as solid as steel. If Jack says your car will run, it will run. No contracts, no paperwork, just a firm handshake. Emily, his only daughter, is his greatest pride. He worked extra shifts, took every side job he could find, all to send her to college without a penny of debt. Now, she's married into a world Jack doesn't belong to. Wealth, crystal chandeliers, and cold stares. Jack doesn't wear tailored suits. He's never sipped wine that costs more than his week's groceries. But he knows what dignity means. And to him, dignity isn't in the clothes you wear. It's in the way you treat people. What Jack doesn't know is that in just a few hours that belief will be tested in a room full of strangers. And everything about his quiet life will be turned upside down. The Harringtons lived in a different universe. Worthington Hills, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns looked hand-painted and the air itself felt expensive. Every driveway boasted a luxury car. Every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Margaret Harrington, Emily's mother-in-law, was the queen of that world. Sharp eyes, perfect posture. A smile that never quite reached her eyes. She didn't dislike Jack. She simply didn't think about him at all, unless he happened to be standing in her way. Her husband, Charles Harrington, built his fortune in real estate development. The kind of man who shook hands with politicians, then washed them immediately afterward. Their son Nathan married Emily 3 years ago. Nathan was polite to Jack, always polite. But his politeness carried that thin layer of distance, like a handshake through a pane of glass. Jack's first dinner with the Harringtons had been unforgettable for the wrong reasons. He remembered the quick glance between Margaret and Charles when Emily introduced him. "This is my father. He's a mechanic." Margaret's lips had curved into something that might have been a smile, if not for the pause before her response. How practical. Tonight was Margaret's 60th birthday. An evening at the Worthington Hills Country Club. Dress code business casual. But when Nathan called earlier, his tone made it clear that wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Jack said yes. Not because he wanted to impress them, but because Emily had asked. And for her, he would walk into a room full of people who thought they were better than him, and stand tall. What he couldn't know was that by the end of the night, those same people would never look at him the same way again. The call came late Saturday morning. Jack was halfway through his coffee, the newspaper open to the sports section. When the phone rang, he expected Emily. Instead, it was Nathan. Jack, my mother's birthday dinner is tonight. 7 o'clock. Worthington Hills Country Club. No, how are you? No small talk, just the details delivered like a summons. Jack hesitated. That's thoughtful. Nathan's voice tightened. Emily wants you there. Dress is business casual. The club has standards. The last word hung in the air. Standards. Jack knew exactly what he meant. He opened his closet. Rows of shirts that had seen better days, pressed but softened by years of wear. He picked a navy blue one, safe understated dark enough to hide the wear. Mary used to iron his shirts to perfection. Now he relied on wrinkle-release spray and hope. Next came the gift. His wallet held just enough for something modest. He drove to the mall, weaving through weekend crowds until he found a silver picture frame. Elegant, simple $68. More than he'd planned to spend. But this wasn't about impressing Margaret Harrington. It was about showing up for Emily. By 4 o'clock, the frame was wrapped in crisp tissue tucked into a gift bag with ribbon handles. The Toyota was clean enough. The GPS said he'd arrive with time to spare. But on the highway, with the afternoon sun slanting low, Jack saw a silver Mercedes pulled over on the shoulder. Hazard lights flashing. He could have kept driving. Most people would have. But Jack Miller wasn't most people. And stopping for that stranger would change the night forever. The Mercedes was spotless, except for the hood propped open like a white flag of surrender. Beside it stood a woman in her 60s. Silver hair tailored navy blazer heels that had never touched gravel. She looked calm, but out of place on the side of an interstate. Jack eased his Toyota onto the shoulder hazard lights, blinking in rhythm with hers. Stepping out, he kept his hands visible, his voice steady. Car trouble. She turned, sizing him up. The engine died. All the warning lights came on. Her voice was polished, deliberate, someone used to being heard. I'm Jack, used to be a mechanic. Mind if I take a look? A pause. Then she extended her hand. Lauren Whitfield, and yes, please. Under the hood, Jack's instincts kicked in. Coolant sprayed across the engine. A shredded belt dangled loose. Water pumps gone. Took the belt with it. I can get you running, but it'll take a while. Lauren checked her slim gold watch. How long? Hour and a half, maybe 2. She hesitated. I'm already late for a birthday gathering. Jack smiled faintly. Join the club. From the trunk, he pulled his emergency kit, a battered toolbox, jumper cables, and a rebuilt alternator he'd picked up at a junkyard just in case. As he worked, traffic roared by. Lauren stood by the guardrail, watching, asking questions, not the polite kind, but the curious kind. She learned about Mary, about Emily, about why Jack never ignored someone stranded on the road. An hour later, the Mercedes purred like new. Lauren offered to pay. Jack refused, and as she typed her number into his phone, neither of them knew. They'd be seeing each other again, very soon. By the time Jack pulled into Worthington Hills, the sun had slipped low, casting gold across manicured lawns. Luxury cars lined the Harrington driveway, sleek BMWs, spotless Audis, a black Bentley that gleamed like polished obsidian. Jack's 10-year-old Toyota looked like it had taken a wrong turn into the wrong world. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Grease stains had worked their way into his shirt. His hair was windblown from the highway. No amount of quick cleanup could hide the evidence of 2 hours under a car hood. Still, he grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat. The ribbon handles were limp from the heat, but the silver frame inside was safe. Margaret answered the door herself. Her eyes swept over him in a single, cutting glance, pausing just long enough to register every smudge, every wrinkle. "Jack," she said flatly, 2.5 hours late. "Helped someone with car trouble," Jack replied, holding out the gift. She took it with the tips of her fingers as though it might stain her dress. Inside, the air smelled of champagne and money. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble foyer in warm light. Conversations paused as heads turned. In a sea of pressed suits and designer dresses, Jack stood out like a grease mark on silk. Charles Harrington emerged from the living room, wine in hand. "Well, he said you made it." Emily appeared behind him, relief flashing across her face. "Dad, I was worried." She hugged him, ignoring the oil on his shirt. But the stares from the rest of the room weren't just curious. They were weighing him, measuring him, and deciding before he'd said another word that he didn't belong. Dinner hadn't even started when Margaret made her move. Jack was about to take a seat at the long mahogany table when her voice sliced through the chatter. "Oh, I don't think so." The room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes shifted toward them, the clink of silverware stopping mid-air. Margaret's smile was tight, polite enough for company, venomous underneath. "If you can't dress like a gentleman," she said, "then you shouldn't sit at the table with gentlemen." Emily's face went pale. "Mom, that's my father." "And I'm aware," Margaret replied smoothly, "which is why I'm being as gracious as I can." Jack stood still, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Charles added, "We have standards here, Jack. You understand." The word standards hit harder than they knew. He thought of the hour he'd spent on the side of the road, sleeves, rolled hands, blackened with grease, making sure a stranger got home safe. And here, those same hands, those same clothes were grounds for exile. Emily stepped forward, desperate. He was helping someone whose car broke down. That's who he is. He helps people. "Exactly the problem," Margaret said, turning to the guests. "Some people simply don't know when their place is elsewhere." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Not one. Jack met Margaret's gaze. Calm, steady. He'd been underestimated before. And tonight, they were going to regret it. Without another word, he stepped back from the table. "Enjoy your dinner," he said quietly. And as he turned toward the door, he heard the sound of expensive heels clicking across marble. Someone else had just arrived. Jack was halfway to the door when the sound of heels on the driveway cut through the awkward silence. Sharp, confident. Not the hurried steps of a late guest, these were measured, deliberate. Through the glass panels, a silver Mercedes came into view. The same one Jack had been elbow-deep in just hours earlier. Margaret's posture stiffened. Charles muttered under his breath, "She's early." Nathan adjusted his tie, suddenly looking less sure of himself. The front door opened, and in stepped Lauren Whitfield. Perfectly composed silver hair shining under the chandelier. Her navy blazer looked as crisp as it had on the highway. But when she saw Jack, her expression lit with genuine warmth. "Jack, what a wonderful surprise to see you here." She crossed the foyer without hesitation, ignoring the Harringtons' frozen stares. "How did the rest of your drive go? I hope you weren't too late for your family gathering." Jack allowed himself the smallest smile. "This is it," he said. Lauren's brows lifted, her gaze flicking towards Margaret and Charles before returning to Jack. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Margaret jumped in voice, dripping with artificial sweetness. "Mrs. Whitfield, welcome. We're so honored to have you join us." "The pleasure's mine," Lauren replied, though her eyes sharpened, reading the tension in the room like an open book. She turned back to Jack. "Everyone should know this man spent 2 hours on the highway today getting my car back on the road. Refused a penny for it." A ripple moved through the guests. The Harringtons' faces tightened, but it was too late. The power in the room had shifted. Jack wasn't leaving anymore. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The polite hum of conversation had died. Lauren's words hung in the air, and everyone knew they were more than a compliment, they were a challenge. Charles cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Yes, well, Jack is helpful." The word landed like an insult disguised as praise. Lauren's gaze shifted to him, calm but unyielding. "Helpful, I'd say selfless fits better. It's not every day a stranger gives up his afternoon to help someone he's never met without expecting anything in return." Margaret's smile was fixed in place, brittle at the edges. "Well, of course we appreciate that. We were just concerned about his attire for the occasion." Lauren tilted her head slightly. "His attire? You mean the clothes he wore while making sure I got here safely?" A murmur swept through the guests. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Charles shifted in his seat as if wishing he could disappear into the leather. Lauren's voice softened, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "I've spent 30 years in boardrooms, and I can tell you this character will outshine a tailored suit any day." Sadly, not everyone learns that lesson early enough. Eyes around the room darted between Lauren and the Harringtons. The power dynamic had flipped, and everyone could feel it. Jack stood quietly, letting her words do the work. He didn't need to defend himself anymore. The Harringtons had just been put on trial in their own home, and the verdict was coming. Lauren didn't sit. Instead, she stepped closer to the dining table, her heels clicking against the marble like a gavel striking wood. "Maybe someone should explain," she said evenly, "what was said to Jack before I arrived." Margaret's hands tightened around her wine glass. "Nothing inappropriate. We merely—" He was told. Jack said, his voice calm, but carrying that if I couldn't dress like a gentleman, I couldn't sit at the table with gentlemen. A few guests gasped. Lauren's face didn't change, but the air around her seemed to sharpen. "I see." She let the words settle like frost over the room. "And this is how you treat the man who made it possible for me to be here tonight." Charles tried to recover. "Mrs. Whitfield, you have to understand our gatherings have certain standards." Lauren's eyes locked on his. "Standards. Yes, let's talk about standards." She scanned the room, ensuring every guest was listening. Jack spent 2 hours in the heat working with his hands so that I wouldn't be stranded on the side of the highway. He didn't ask who I was, how much money I had, or whether helping me would benefit him. That's a standard worth keeping. Margaret opened her mouth, but Lauren raised a hand, stopping her cold. "And what standard is it," she continued, "that humiliates a man for the very act that showed his decency?" The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Jack stood still watching. Lauren was doing what he'd dreamed of for years, making them face themselves. And from the way their polished facades were cracking, they weren't going to like what they saw. Lauren placed her clutch gently on the table as if she were about to close a business deal. But her voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of a verdict. "Here's what's going to happen," she began. "Either Jack sits at this table tonight with the respect he deserves, or I walk out that door right now." The Harringtons froze. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. Charles's eyes darted to the guests, his clients, his investors, his reputation, all watching him squirm. Lauren, he started, but she didn't let him finish. No, this isn't negotiable. The way you treat people when you think no one important is watching, that's who you really are, and I've been watching. The weight of her words hit the room like a hammer. Guests exchanged glances. Some hid faint smiles. Others leaned forward, eager to see how far this would go. Margaret's tone softened into something almost pleading. Of course, Jack is welcome at our table. We were just concerned for his comfort. Lauren arched an eyebrow. How thoughtful, she said, her voice laced with ice. Then I'll make sure he's seated beside me. She turned to Jack, offering her arm like they were about to be announced at a gala. Shall we? Jack hesitated only a moment before taking it. The movement alone spoke volumes. Margaret's face tightened. Charles swallowed hard. As they walked toward the head of the table, every eye followed. Lauren had just reversed the balance of power, and Jack knew they wouldn't recover from it. Tonight, the Harringtons' perfect image was bleeding out, right in front of their guests. The meal had barely begun when Charles, desperate to salvage his standing, leaned toward Lauren. We're so pleased you could join us this evening. Your reputation in the investment community precedes you. Lauren set down her fork, her smile polite but unreadable. Does it? Margaret jumped in. Of course, when we heard you were reviewing our proposal, the words hung in the air like smoke. Jack's eyes narrowed. Proposal. Lauren's gaze flicked between them, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. So, this dinner wasn't just about family, was it? Charles cleared his throat. Well, we had hoped you'd see the value in the Thompson Plaza expansion. Your firm's involvement would be a tremendous asset. The ripple that went through the guests was unmistakable. Suddenly, the stakes were crystal clear. Lauren wasn't just an important guest, she was the decision-maker who could make or break the Harringtons' next big project. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting the irony sink in. These people had gone out of their way to humiliate him, and now their financial future was sitting at the same table, arm in arm with the man they'd tried to push out. Lauren dabbed her lips with a napkin, then spoke in that same even tone that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Interesting. You're asking for my trust, after showing me exactly how you treat someone you don't think matters. Margaret paled. Charles's fork clinked against his plate. They both knew it. This wasn't just social embarrassment anymore. They'd just jeopardized millions, and their downfall was now in motion. Lauren didn't rush her next words. She let the silence stretch every second, tightening the noose around the Harringtons' composure. I've been in business long enough to know numbers are only half the equation. She began, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. The other half is character. Integrity, the way you treat people when you think there's nothing to gain. Her gaze swept the table, lingering on Charles, then Margaret. Tonight, you've shown me exactly who you are. Not when the cameras are on. Not when you're pitching investors here in your own home when you believed the only witnesses were your friends. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. This wasn't just dinner anymore, it was a reckoning. Charles tried to interject. Mrs. Whitfield, please. No. Lauren cut in, her voice slicing through his protest like glass. Let me be clear. The man you dismissed, insulted, and tried to exclude is the reason I'm even here tonight. Without him, I'd still be stranded on the side of the highway. He worked with his hands got dirty and refused any payment. Because that's who he is. Jack stayed silent, watching their carefully built facade crumble. Lauren's tone sharpened. and you so eager to maintain standards look down on him for it. That's not just poor judgment, that's disqualifying. She leaned back slightly, the verdict landing like a final gavel strike. I will not be investing in Thompson Plaza. I don't partner with people who fail the simplest test of decency. A hush fell over the table. The Harringtons' perfect evening had just been dismantled, and everyone in the room knew it. Jack didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just sat there for a moment, letting the weight of Lauren's words settle like dust after an explosion. Margaret stared at her plate, her knuckles white around her silverware. Charles's jaw worked silently like he was chewing on words he couldn't afford to say out loud. The guests avoided eye contact with the hosts, their attention fixed anywhere else. Jack finally pushed back his chair. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. "Lauren," he said quietly, "thank you." He stood smoothing the front of his shirt, not that it would ever pass their so-called standards. Then he turned to Rachel, who looked caught between pride and heartbreak. "You're better than this place," he told her gently. "Don't let their bitterness change who you are." Her eyes shone as she hugged him, holding on a beat longer than usual. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You've got nothing to be sorry for." Lauren rose as well, retrieving her clutch. "Jack," she said warmly, "I think we have better things to do with our evening." Without another glance at the Harringtons, the two walked toward the door. The click of Lauren's heels and Jack's steady steps were the only sounds in the room. At the threshold, Jack paused and turned his head just enough to speak over his shoulder. "You wanted me gone. Congratulations, you got your wish." He opened the door to the cool night air, stepping out into something that felt a lot like freedom. Behind them, the Harringtons' glittering dining room felt less like a show of wealth, and more like the ruins of a collapsed empire. The night air wrapped around Jack like a welcome blanket, cool, crisp, and free of pretense. He took a slow breath, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. Lauren stepped beside him, her expression calm but satisfied. "You handled yourself well in there," she said. Jack gave a small laugh. "I didn't really do anything. You were the one who leveled the field." She shook her head. "You showed me your character before we ever stepped into that house. Tonight just gave everyone else the chance to see it." They reached her car, the silver sedan gleaming under the streetlights. Jack's beat-up truck sat a few spaces away, looking almost proud of its scrapes and dents. "You hungry?" Lauren asked. "Starving. I know a place where the food's good, the chairs don't squeak when you breathe, and nobody cares how much your clothes cost." Jack smiled, the kind of genuine smile he hadn't felt in a long time. "Lead the way." They drove with the windows cracked, letting the scent of fresh rain and spring grass fill the quiet between them. No speeches, no rehearsed lines. Just two people who understood something most in that dining room never would respect isn't bought, and dignity can't be faked. For the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like the underdog in someone else's story. He felt free. And as the neon sign of a small-town diner came into view, he realized this wasn't the end of the night. It was the beginning of something entirely new. The diner was warm, filled with the low hum of honest conversation and the smell of fresh coffee. Jack sat across from Lauren in a corner booth, the kind with worn leather seats that had heard more real stories than any marble ballroom ever would. They talked about everything except the Harringtons, about family, about work, about the quiet things in life that actually matter. Jack found himself laughing, genuinely laughing for the first time in years. When the check came, Lauren slid it toward herself without a word. Jack raised an eyebrow. "I thought you didn't pay for kindness." "I don't," she said with a smirk, But I do pay for good company. Outside, the rain had stopped. Streetlights reflected in the wet pavement, making the whole town glow. Jack stood there a moment before heading to his truck, feeling a rare and steady peace. Jack Lauren called before getting into her car, "Remember, character doesn't just win respect. It changes lives. Yours included." He nodded, tucking the words away like a keepsake. Driving home, Jack realized that revenge hadn't come in anger or grand gestures. It had come quietly in the form of truth, revealed masks ripped away, and dignity left standing. To anyone else, it might have looked like just another night. But for Jack, it was the night he got his life back. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this story. Because sometimes justice walks in when you least expect it. If you want more stories where karma finds its way home, make sure you subscribe. There's always another truth worth telling, and another mask waiting to fall.